where in the world you are today, if you would.
And hello and welcome. I am
Yeah.
Ursula and I'm here with Ann. We are Be Above Leadership, and this is our quarterly free webinar for anyone who is interested in our work. And today we are going to unpack how neuroscience has helped us in our personal lives. So we're gonna get personal.
We'll see what you think as well. Oh my gosh, we have a very international group, because I happen to know Stella is in Norway.
Yes.
We have Amsterdam. Welcome. Welcome, welcome. Both places that we love and have gotten to spend some time in the last few years and are really hoping to come back.
Yes.
Calgary.
And, Beth and Amanda, welcome.
Oh, it's awesome. Beth, you're just to the south of me, and Barb, you're just to the north of me. So that's cool. I'm in Santa Fe, New Mexico.
And I am in Minneapolis today, where it suddenly has gotten out of 20 into 50
Nice
degrees. So yeah, we're out of the freeze for 3 days, and then we're going to go back.
Welcome. Well, we're pretty informal. If you know us, you know that about us. If you've never met us, you will learn that about us. I like to say that neuroscience and consciousness are way too important to be taken seriously. So there we
go. Talking about this being November 2nd, 2020, I think there are so many serious matters in the world that it is absolutely delightful to be able to take a deep breath and look at the lighthearted place in our world. And so this is one of them.
We're getting a thumbs up from that. But it also is one of the things that I think sort of big picture, and then Ursula and I are going to talk about this. We'll have some chance for Q&A and also for you to share as well. But as COVID started last spring, Ursula and I found that we were having a lot of conversations between the two of us about how helpful it was to have some understanding about our own brains, and about that really helped us with our own resilience. So we wanted to talk about a few areas that learning about our own brain has helped with our effectiveness and mental and sanity, I think, in the same time. Yeah.
And
so go ahead, honey. Sorry.
And there's so many places we could go, but I think we really honed in 3 areas, because otherwise we could be here until, tomorrow. So we're going to look at neuroplasticity, at prefrontal cortex and stress, and right and left hemisphere.
Yeah, and we'll see if anything else comes up or other questions. So Ursula, let me just go kind of big picture and welcome if you're coming on. If you're just coming on, go ahead and type in the chat where you're calling in from. We have a lovely international group of old friends and new. Yeah. So Ursula, so just don't even worry about doing things in a linear way. What is one of the things that learning about the brain, one areas of the brain that has really made a difference to you personally, and how?
Well, as you probably know from our many conversations way back when we started studying the brain, learning about my prefrontal cortex and what it needs in order to be smart instead of stupid, really helped me.
Okay.
Because as it relates to my own life and the kind of stimulation and work and workload that I could take on, I would always have this perspective that I could take on an unlimited amount of anything and everything. And at some point I realized that wasn't true, and I actually beat myself up for what I called my limitations. That I couldn't do just one more thing, and that there came a point when I was just going like, well, why can't I do this one more thing?
Yeah. And I'm going to pull up, I pulled some slides just so we had otherwise I have to just draw bad scribbles on little scraps of paper. So I figure sometimes slides are really helpful. I think so I'm going to come back to that in a minute, but this idea of what is happening in this part of our brain, in the prefrontal cortex. If you might be familiar with it, lots of people are. If you're not, don't worry. It's right behind the eyes. It sits right up here, often referred to as the seat of executive functioning. I think a lot of times when we say to someone, I need to think about that, that's where we're activating a lot of this part of the brain. You have a right one and a left one, and they have different orientations and kind of bring different things. But overall, this is a part of the brain that I think gives us such ability to recover ourselves. And when I was in neuroscience school back in 2011, so it's going back almost 10 years at this point, when I learned about this, I think I called Ursula immediately and said, my whole life is now clear.
Yes. Well, and I absolutely agree, because the prefrontal cortex really functions best when it has two chemicals in balance, and they are created through stress and stimulation. And that was sort of the tipping point for me in going, okay, the more I have stuff to do and the more there is stimulation, and often in very good ways, but there comes a point when the overload of those two chemicals just sends me
Yeah.
very
So
much.
let me kind of slow that down and kind of unpack that a little bit more, because this was such a fascinating thing for me as well. And for me, this is when I think about what every human being should know about their brain and ideally be taught in high school or even earlier. This is one aspect of it. And we can talk a little bit about how this affects how this matures. But the person who did the research calls this part of the brain Goldilocks. And if you've been in class or been around us, you'll know we talk about that. And I know we have some old friends on here who know this well. But this to me was such an aha, because Amy Arnsten came into my, I watched a video, or if she actually spoke at my neuroscience class, and she said this higher part of the brain needs to be in balance. And if you are understimulated, we use the word stimulation because often stress gets processed solely as negative, but really the truth is it really is just stress. It's how much impact you're having on your system. And when it is understimulated or overstimulated, it's a U curve, and it takes you to an ineffective state. This part of the brain, it needs this right chemical balance, like seasoning in a stew. Too little salt in the stew or too much salt, it's inedible, but you get just the right amount, it's delicious. And that's kind of how your brain is. And to be able to say, oh, if I as Ursula was saying earlier, oh my gosh, when I start feeling like I can't focus anymore, it's not because there's something deficient in me. It's probably because my brain is overloaded chemically. Or if I can't focus because my deadline's too far in the future, maybe there's not something wrong with me. Maybe I just don't have enough stress to be able to really write the paper or prepare the PowerPoint or whatever. So
Yeah, no, I remember those days. In those days, my husband traveled a lot internationally, and I, was alone at home with, two kids going into the teenage years. And one of the things that I really sort of really noticed was actually my lack of empathy. And I, considered myself a really bad parent, and it was really hard without the knowledge of the prefrontal cortex and what it does and doesn't do. It's really hard to know whether you are just a really bad human being or whether there is a way that you can modify that impact and how to do that.
yeah. And let's talk about that a little bit, and then I want to see what thoughts or questions people have. I just put a link in the chat, which is if you want this little diagram, it's in a blog that I write called yourcoachingbrain.wordpress.com, and this is called the Goldilocks of your brain, and everything that we're talking about, including the little diagram I just showed, is up there. So, and we're happy to pull that diagram back up as well if you like us to. But one of the questions I have for you, Ursula, is, okay, so this is a thing. somebody said to me recently in class, like, there's all of this stuff about the brain, and what she said was, one of the things I appreciate is you guys actually link it to something practical. So that's what we're trying to do here as best we can. So how is this so great? So this part of the brain needs the right amount of stress. That's interesting information. How have you used this personally?
Well, I am much more aware of the input that's coming into my life in form of stress and stimulation in all kinds of forms, whether this is social media, TV, projects, deadlines, family commitments. You and I used to travel crazily all over the world just a couple of years ago. And so I am constantly aware now to just keep noticing and keep modifying that input by saying, okay, that is one thing I'm not going to do right now, because if I take that on right now, I'm going to go over the curve. Or if I am not taking this on, I'm going to be on the other side. I'm going to be in boredom, which for me, in the too little, is this, obviously it's both sides, too little and too much have exactly the same feeling. And so for me, the too little is as much as a noticing as the too much.
I really love that. So you can use it as a screen for how do I want my life to look?
Yes.
And I think about, famously, this is one of those things that gets attributed to the Dalai Lama and also Gandhi, and who knows who said it first, maybe the Buddha. But basically, if I'm busy, I meditate for an hour in the morning. If I'm really busy, I meditate for 2 hours.
Yeah.
And I think what that is what we're saying is, when these things are going on, I'm even more aware of the impact on my stress curve and how I have to manage it. And I think about, recently, I had a day where I had 3 different high stakes Zoom things, classes that I was teaching. I was doing something for ICF Advance. And in between each one, I was like, what can I do to manage my Goldilocks curve so that I can actually have access? I'm going to share the screen again. I wanted access to all of the blue words at the top, like, okay, memory. I need access to my memory. I need access to empathy. I need access to, being able to think abstractly. And so between each thing, I was either meditating, I went for a walk, I took a nap. All of it was around, I know I can't just keep adding. I have to do some balancing there. The
Well,
other thing, oh, go
yes.
ahead. Sorry, I had another thing I
Yeah.
would say, but a different point. So go ahead.
Yeah, well, the what I was also wanting to say is, what's interesting about this curve is that I began to be able to do this moment by moment. And so way back when, I would like go right down the curve, and it would be totally, I would be, I would be almost like an exploding, ready to be exploded volcano.
Wait a minute. Which of the red words, I'm sorry, I have to I guess I have to leave it up. Which of the red words were you like?
Poor impulse control, poor decision making, lack of empathy, and black and white thinking. I mean,
Yeah.
that was like, that volcano. But it now I know the subtle
Yeah.
movement, and that I think is what's really helpful about this.
I love that. The other thing that I was going to say, and then actually I have an inspiration. Maybe we should have people go into do a little chat with each other in a
Oh,
minute.
that's great. Yeah, let's do that.
But the other thing that I think of in terms of how I use it is, it answers the question, what's wrong with me?
Mm-hmm.
I think it's one answer. It's not the only answer. Sometimes there's other ones. But a lot of times, it's sort of like, I don't feel like myself. I can't focus. I'm irritable. I'm, short-tempered. My memory is going, what's wrong with me? This for me has become a really good first place to look. Am I either bored, understimulated, or have I got too much coming on? And so therefore I know what I might want to do. Let me see if I can find some kind of stimulation, reach out to a friend, for me, I go paint, like, even if I don't feel like it, find something more interesting than Netflix, or like take a nap, go for a walk, do something to decrease my stress. So I really, I think before having the brain, the question, what's wrong with me, felt
Mhm.
so elusive,
Yeah.
or it would feel like what's wrong with me is I'm a bad person.
Yeah.
You know, right?
Exactly. I mean, it really, I mean, that was really the impact because I didn't know how to not be a bad
Right.
person. Because
Rhymes with wit.
yeah, my prefrontal cortex wasn't in a state that it could clearly think about whether I was a bad person or not.
Yeah.
There was just too much going on.
So
So
let's have everybody go into, like, I think you have the control,
I
Ursula.
have the power.
You have the power. Put everybody, if I end up in a room, I'll just bounce myself out. But go ahead and go in a room and talk about what makes sense to you about this. Some of you have already been through this, some of you haven't, but what's interesting to you about this? And if you have any questions that you want to bring back, and maybe just like, what do you think about 6 or 7 minutes?
Yeah, sounds good. 6
Okay,
minutes. And we're sort of an odd number, I think. So there will be two or
three,
three people. Yeah,
2 or 3 people
two
in
or
your room.
three people
Okay,
in your room. Okay.
sounds good.
All right.
If I end I just went out of Stala's room,
Yeah,
so
I moved Starlet to roommate.
okay.
There we
And
go.
then
Yeah.
Beth's not in a room.
Yes.
You want to pause the recording?
Oh yeah.
Okay. Oh, good. How fun is that?
There we go.
What? Oops, sorry. That was
Oh,
me.
that's easy.
Sorry, I forgot to go on do not disturb. Yeah. So what like sparked for you, or what questions do you have?
Yeah, you can put it in the chat or unmute yourself. We would love to hear your voice.
I'll ask a question that we discussed in the group, which included Jennifer and Stale, and we all sort of shared this curiosity, which is that when you're thinking about the chemistry, which I know very little about, you're talking about the dopamine and the norepinephrine being low or high. Is there a situation ever where they're not in lockstep? One is high, the other is low, vice versa, and how does that play out?
My answer to that is probably, and if that's the number one question I would ask if I could have dinner with the researcher, because it seems like I always think about this when we first did this and we were in a room and we had everybody stand on either one side or the other, the giant curve. And one of our lovely students had a very perplexed look on her face because the question we'd ask is, where are you right now? And she had we were like, what's going on? She said, can I be in both places? We said, well, I don't know. Tell us. She said, I'm really stressed out about things I don't care about. And to me, that sounds like high norepinephrine, which is adrenaline in the brain. It's the form, sometimes gets known as noradrenaline. I think that's more of a European, particularly I see that in British writing, noradrenaline, norepinephrine, same thing. So to me, that sounded like she had high norepinephrine and very low dopamine. There was like no reward, but she was coaching financial planners and had a stack of reports this high and getting pressure every day. When are those reports due? But she hated doing it and didn't care about them and didn't see that it made any difference. And so I have a suspicion around that. At the time she had done her research, she had not done that level, but this research is about 10 or 15 years old, probably at least 15. So I'd love to ask her that. And I haven't been able to find it in the literature so far. That's my
However, it does, however, in many ways, if you just check in how it feels, it does seem to make sense. And I think that is actually a lot of what gets talked about during COVID. People talk about stress, but I think many people are stressed out by the demands and the constant thinking of, the numbers and the masks, and are stuck at home most of the time and missing the reward that they used to get through family gatherings, movies, and things like that. So in many ways, from an emotional standpoint, it seems to make sense to me.
I think the other thing that I would just add in just for accuracy and complexity is that these are two neurotransmitters that, as I recall her saying they were particularly amenable to being researched.
Mm.
And there are other neurotransmitters and hormones that play a role as well in terms of how we feel and even in reducing stress that she just did not do as part of her research. So, and one is, for example, serotonin is a very difficult molecule to research. So we would know that serotonin was also playing a role. We also know when we think about COVID, that oxytocin, which we get most strongly generally from physical connection, there's other ways we can get it as well, that will help moderate some of the stress impacts. So it's the brain is a big soup, but these are big players in the soup. And even just understanding this can be helpful.
Yeah.
So, and then somebody put in the chat, let's see, yeah, Regine, yeah, the uncertainty, I think that's been another piece that Ursula and I have found to play. I think that plays a big role as well, because when we're uncertain, our brain tends to stay in a higher level of alert, sort of like we need to be more ready to go. And there's some other aspects of the brain that play a role in that for sure. Yeah. Any other questions that came up or other ahas as you talked about this in your group? Her name is on the hand, it's in there. Her name is Dr. Amy Arnsten. She's at Yale. And I think she just recently put out a new YouTube video. I don't think it's a TED Talk. I think there's a YouTube video where she's specifically talking about COVID. Somebody sent me that and I bookmarked it to watch and forgot to. So take a look, Arnsten, Arnsten. She's kind of the premier researcher in this area about the prefrontal cortex. And if you go to that blog post, her name is you can see that it's listed on the blog post as well as the reference.
Yeah,
it's there. Yeah. Yeah, any other ahas or questions?
May I just drop in for a second? In our group, we spoke briefly about how to be able to always kind of gauge where we are on which side of the spectrum. And I was wondering if you had anything to share with that. The one that we came up with was before you, let's say, agree to do something or say yes to something, you might want to say, hey, I'll let you know later, and let the excitement settle a little bit and then make that decision, which is only, it's maybe only one way, but you have to realize that you tend to say very quickly yes. But is there anything else that you would suggest, in particular when it's yourself who's saying, oh, this sounds interesting, I would like to do this and that, and kind of create that overload yourself because you're so excited, it's so it feels so great, and then you said yes to all the things, or you signed up for certain things, and out of a sudden you are stressed out.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Regine, you know, at the curve, there is a place at the top that we call just right. And I think one of the interesting things about the diagram and this research is trying to figure out for ourselves what our just right is. And as a coach, what I have noticed is that there's, from a client perspective, there's actually very few people that know what that means. So, you know, for you to go into this place of, well, what is just right? What is too little? What is too much? But what might be my just right can give you a little bit of a compass of what that feels like and what you need to do to sort of stay in that zone.
Yeah, and I would say, you know, I pulled the slide back up again, because when we are in balance, we have more access to goal direction, delaying gratification, being able to make and retrieve memories, more empathy, being able to think more abstractly. Our neurons just have the right amount of chemicals to play with without being flooded. And so I just think of our brain as being very available. And so one of the questions is, when I have had that experience, when I have felt these blue words in my brain, you know, what was I doing? What was the amount of stress? And I want to make an additional point, and this might seem obvious, but I really try to share this in particular with every leader that I coach, because we tend to think, unless we know about this model, we tend to think everyone should have the response to stress that is our response to stress. And often people end up in high position leadership roles because it takes a lot to push them over the curve, depending on the organization. But in certain organizations, you have people, they can take a lot of stress and really be at their best. And so they think everybody should. Now, maybe they're not actually at their best. Maybe they're acting in bad ways. That's another question. But sometimes it's that they legitimately need a lot of input in order to have their brain be kind of lit up. So they need to know not everyone, everyone has a different amount of stress. This is highly individual, and it can be highly contextual as well. So the stress that works for me in relationships is very different than the stress that works for me intellectually. Intellectually, I need a huge amount of complexity. In relationships, I need very little.
Well, but it also
what thing to me, and I'm like over the curve, like I can't think or process. So.
But I think, going back to contextually, if you look at all the areas of our lives, every area, every piece adds either stimulation and stress or not. And so, depending on the complexity of life, I mean, I'm looking at my daughter raising two little kids, working full time, being in the construction of their house. Well, all the bits and pieces of their life, of her life, there is a different input in regards to stimulation overall than my own.
Yeah. And it's a complex thing. And so I think this, this wonderful question that Regina is asking about, how do you know? I do like the ghost, if you are a yes, I want to say yes to everything. Maybe because you're bored, like be aware of that. But I think it's also, to me, I use this metaphor a lot of riding a bicycle, that if you're first starting out to ride a bicycle, you tip too far to one side and then you like, and you're back on the other side. Mm-hmm. And I think that's part of how we learn this. If you can bring it into awareness and keep asking, where am I right now? You can start finding that sweet center. And I'll give you just a really practical example. I have learned in the Zoom environment that I can do 2 classes in one day. And if I do 3, I'm hanging on by my fingernails. It's too much. 2 is good. 1 is perfect. 2 is okay. 2 just puts me a little over the edge. If I have a week where I have none, I start feeling a little flat. So there's also like, you can just kind of go, how do I feel? That was too much, too many coaching clients, too much Zoom, whatever. Yeah.
And that's really, it's for every individual to discover, what takes you in that zone and what takes you out of it.
I also we should go on to something else, but I also think there are people we know who are more impacted by dopamine, and also it goes away more quickly. And sometimes this can mean they pick fights to try to get, and sometimes teenagers will do this. I think of, they're trying to get some kind of something going on in their brain. I was in a relationship with someone like this where it was like, why are we fighting about this? And until I realized he was highly impacted by dopamine, and it also it didn't last. That good feeling didn't last. And so there were lots of like, I don't see the need to have a fight about this, but for him it was, I think otherwise he felt like he was a little bit half dead. I don't recommend being in a relationship with people like that if you're not like that, because it was like, I could never figure out why now I kind of go, oh, that's why we were fighting, but it wasn't productive. So yeah, track how you're feeling, Brad. I think that's great. Ursula, so you said this was a really big one. Maybe we have time at least to talk about one more. If you like, what else has been particularly helpful for you understanding your brain in terms of your own growth and effectiveness?
Well, I think, sharing second place on the podium has to be neuroplasticity, but also right and left hemisphere, that they were both equally impactful. I want to go to neuroplasticity first because Barb said, knowing that the brain has the ability to be plastic, we are able to change our behaviors, our beliefs, our actions, as long as we, repeat. That certainly had an impact for me in regards to particularly health and exercise and certain routines that I felt like I was struggling with literally for years.
And I think we can even look at it in terms of the messages we send to ourselves. One of the things so neuroplasticity, many people are familiar, maybe not everybody, but it's basically just that the brain is plastic, which I didn't even realize. This is like, when I first heard that word, I'm like, what does that even mean? Well, something that's plastic is able to change. That's why we call plastic, because you can mold it in lots of different ways, including iPhone covers. But I didn't know that like 10 years ago. Like, oh, okay, I didn't even really realize that's why we call something plastic. It's more than just the thing, it's the quality of the thing. So the brain is plastic, it can change. And one of the things that I've started realizing, and this is true for me as well, is this sort of theoretical understanding. Okay, we now know that the brain can change. But I started realizing people didn't realize you're doing it all day, every day. You are changing your own brain.
Yeah.
It applies to us. What am I thinking?
Yeah.
What am I doing? What are the habits that I'm either reinforcing or, trying to build? This is not just this like, oh, I had a brain injury, so I need to access this odd thing called neuroplasticity and find a different way to wire my brain. No, you're doing it right now.
Yeah.
All the time.
No, I completely agree. The awareness that literally on a minute by minute basis, my thoughts, my actions, my beliefs, my habits are either effective and therefore, keep going, Ursula, or are not effective. And I need to be aware of that to make some adjustments. It's such an interesting perspective of looking at how we operate on a daily basis.
Yeah, and sort of saying, in some ways, it's what I want to say about that. That's kind of the good news and the bad news.
Yeah.
On the one hand, we have, as Barb said, takes some neuroplasticity to know we can rewire the brain, even in terms of understanding, wait a minute, what do I need right now? You're wiring that in, or even sort of wiring in the habit of saying, I'm going to check in with how I feel. So we have this potential. But the other thing is, like, every time I mean, this is a silly example, but it's true. Every time I go for the chips at 8 o'clock, I am building a better pathway to get those chips at 8 o'clock. And my mouth is expecting those chips at 8 o'clock. And that's, there's a whole kind of, and every time I do it, it's easier and more habitual to do it. And that's true with everything. So this neuroplasticity is such an interesting neutral aspect of the brain. Use it how you want, but you're using it.
Talking about chips. The other sort of, I wouldn't say downside, but the other sort of maybe paradox of the whole thing is that on one hand, I have developed a greater patient capacity with other people to realize, some people really struggle with change. But on the other hand, because I know you can change if you really want to and you stick with it, I've also developed a greater impatience with people who are just not wanting to do it.
Or sometimes when I'm not wanting to do it, I'm working to develop an exercise routine right now. And I know that if I just keep doing it, it will become habitual. And it's like, Ann, that. And it's just, oh God, it's so much. So let me do a little bit of technical here. Many of you may know this already. When two neurons fire at the same time repeatedly, chemical changes occur in both. So the two tend to connect more strongly, and they call this long-term potentiality. So I like to say it's like they become friends. And what happens is the more a neural pathway, go get the chips or go exercise, is used, the more on alert it is. It's ready to fire. and if it's used all the time. So for example, if you have a neural pathway, or maybe you have a client who has a neural pathway to defensiveness, that defensiveness, and they've done it for 40 years, everything that's ever come out, every piece of feedback, every challenge, they have just been defensive. They have like a superhighway of defensiveness that comes right up. And so to give them other options, you're looking at the difference between like a superhighway versus a tiny little path in the forest with lots of weeds. Some neural pathways become more myelinated. That's the fatty myelin, is the fatty coating on the axon of a neuron. It's like coating a wire in terms of the electrical signals, and they fire even more efficiently. And we get more of those pathways myelinated when we're younger, which I think is one of the reasons why our earliest habits, fears, everything tend to live longer, because they get laid down and coated with this fat that keeps them very present. But we do like to also quote our dear friend Linda Page, who said neuroplasticity is a 6-syllable word for hope. So because, as Ursula says, we can redo these, we can rewire these things. That's a very basic, high level view. Ursula, should we go back into the breakout rooms just for 5 minutes and talk about, what you see about neuroplasticity for yourself, as well as what any questions you have about it?
Yeah, let's do that.
Do the same people because they've already gotten to know each other?
Yes.
Easy peasy?
Yep.
We're just doing an hour.
Yes.
Yeah.
Beth, can you, there she goes. There she goes.
Recording. Everybody bounces back in. Welcome back. Just going to wait for a minute.
Yeah, always takes a little bit before everybody's back.
Getting everybody back from a break, Some people are still getting coffee. Great.
Good. Yeah, I think we should be good.
Welcome back.
Okay, so any aha moments about neuroplasticity? Or questions?
How about a question?
Yes.
Okay, so Heather said I had to ask this. So what if it's the subtle one about okay, as a coach and I have a client, my client always acts defensive or responds in a defensive manner. So there's that. So it's not this straightforward thing like I say, oh, instead of going for the chips, go exercise. It's this defensive manner thing. Like, how as a coach do we handle that kind of subtle, I don't know. Well,
this is not the only answer to that, but I do think it's part of the, I do think there's kind of a brain 101 for people as a coach, that if they can start understanding how the brain operates, and that every time they act defensively, they get better at acting defensively, and being able to just have an open, non-judgmental conversation about neuroplasticity. Say, like, I just want to point out something, that this is how the brain works. And this is, for me, it's one of the reasons why we take people out of their comfort zone. And to say, look, I want to stop chewing my myelinated cord. That was my cat disrupting my charger cord. But being able to say, this is, it's like, no wonder you do that. You've been doing it for a long time. So you've got some very strong neural pathways there. So of course, so it can, Ursula and I were talking on the break about how, sort of big picture, neuroplasticity can make us kinder to ourselves.
Yeah, the other thing that when we teach that in our class is what we say is neuroplasticity helps us reveal the invisible. And I really like that because we actually don't know, unless we know about neuroplasticity in the brain, what we're wiring in there. So for a client, it might just be, I'm sorry, there's a cute little kitty getting into the plant. He's eating your plant. Anyway,
I know. He's so naughty.
Anyway, so just looking at, what is being wired in not only the ineffective defensive ways, but what are some ways that are effective how he's dealing with people, really reveals the wiring. And once it's revealed, then you can do something about it.
Yeah. So that, and you can give him sort of like the props for, I'm sorry, that's Poirot. Everybody say hi. Hi. Could we not chew the plants today? That you can also then have some props for the little efforts that you make. And there's a wonderful quote from Linda Platt from Kara. She said, sometimes we need to sit in the waiting room and be patient for the time we're ready to make big changes. So I think this is also why we ask our clients, like, what's it costing you? What do you really want? We link it to resonance or dissonance, because without resonance and dissonance, it's just the way life is. And then I love that. Enjoy the grace of the waiting room. It's okay to not want to make that change. And then put the whip in the other room when you're in the waiting room. I think
I love the visual.
Yeah. I think that's just great.
But yeah, I think the ability to look at the wiring and looking at what actually is being done, it can just be hugely helpful in itself.
Brad has a question. If you could read that while I remove the cat from the plant, that would be great.
Because your plant is ready to not be a plant anymore. Question from Breakout. I heard that the brain has a difficult time distinguishing between visualizing an experience and actually having an experience. If you're trying to build a daily habit, but are you going to miss a day, would visualization still help you to build or maintain those neural pathways? So yeah, I think every time we think about something, we visualize it, it will create some neural connection, or it will reinforce an existing one. And it will constantly build on that. So yeah, visualizing, coming back to it. And then there is also this interesting thing about making mistakes. And in the coaching relationship, I think if you want to build a new habit, being able to debrief that can be helpful.
Yeah, and I think the interesting research around visualization also points to that the more expertise you have in an area, the better, the more impact visualization will have. Mm-hmm. If you know how to play the piano, and even watching someone else do it, if you know how to play the piano or you know how to play a particular sport, you can get neural benefit from. Ursula is a wonderful tennis player. She's actually really, really good. So she will watch Roger Federer and she'll be able to have her neurons map what he's doing and can get a little bit of benefit just from watching Roger Federer. I get nothing other than that I think he's cute from watching Roger Federer. So I just myelinate the cute neural pathways.
Yes, exactly. I just wanted to.
I don't know tennis, so it has to be something. You can't imagine that you're a great golf player if you've never played golf. You don't know what neural pathways to put the attention down. But if you've done public speaking and you want to imagine yourself confident at public speaking and you've done it before, you can get that benefit or whatever it is you're trying to do.
Yeah.
Also, I think this is one of the reasons why we don't want to spend a lot of time on, and this is a whole other how to manage this, but worry and anxiety, because you can get better at that. Yeah. It's neutral. So yeah, great. That will save me a lot of running. Just visualize you're running, you're good.
I have tried that, not in regards to running, but in regards to, lifting weights and hoping that, I get bigger muscles. I'm still working on that.
Well, you have to be just as disciplined about the visualization as you are about the weightlifting. And
Yes,
that's the problem with it. So just having a momentary thought is different than really having a visualization. And this is why great sports coaches, Olympic coaches who are coaching sports, they'll use visualization, but it's a discipline. It's like 20 minutes. We're going to visualize this, half an hour, because just a thought, like 30-second thought about lifting weights is probably not going to do it. So
No, apparently not.
Heather,
Heather,
yeah, let's talk about that in our last little moments. Go ahead, Ursula.
so is it counterproductive to discuss worry and anxiety then? Well, it is and it isn't. So I think we need to be aware that just sort of going like, oh, I'm not going to worry, is not going to be helpful, because there is definitely an emotion there that needs to be expressed, because otherwise we suppress, and that's not good for the brain. So sharing, naming the emotion is different from just the constant repeat of the worry story that goes on and on and on. So we need to express the emotion without going on forever.
I have a curve.
Yay!
So on the one hand, there's suppression, which we could say sort of on one side, it's like, no, I'm fine. No, it's all good. No,
Yep.
It's all right. I'm good. We're suppressing it. On the other side, there's indulgence, where it's like really just ruminating on it, chewing on it, telling everybody the same story of woe, looking for partners who can be as upset as you are, all of that. And then there's in the middle, which I would call awareness. And that's naming it, being present to it, noticing what's going on in the body, having it be. But you want to be aware of where it's another curve, like where you are on this continuum. I have gone from naming into indulging in it. And what happens when you go here, biochemically, is you reduce the stress. Yes. Either side, you'll increase the stress. So if you suppress, you'll increase the stress. Naming, you'll reduce the stress. Ramping up, talking a lot about it, ruminating about it, worrying, keeping yourself up at night, you'll increase the stress. Yeah. So Heather, it's a really great question, but you got to hit, as Ursula said, you got to hit right there, which is why talking about it in a coaching conversation can be so helpful, because hopefully the coach will keep it in that sweet spot. Yeah. By using some of the tools that we have. Yeah. Ursula, we're out of time. What a lovely group.
I know, this gave me the stimulation that I need for my Monday morning. I don't know about the rest of you. So before we go, I just wanted to give you a heads up that we have a fabulous webinar coming up, November 10th. It's the 7 levels. We're looking at our consciousness effectiveness model from a personal standpoint. Really looking at, how can we be aware where we are? How can we shift in our personal lives?
And we're bringing some neuroscience into that, but it's really just designed to be a wonderful personal exploration. Most of our coaching series tend to work with coaches. We'll be doing that again this winter, but this one is just for you. And also, if you are a coach and you're interested in learning more about how to bring this to your clients and going deep, we have our virtual consciousness and neuroscience program. I don't know if we have any more room in our December groups, but I know we have room in the spring. I think our December groups are full, but we're starting again in the spring. And feel free to reach out to either me or Ursula, Ann at Be Above Leadership, or Ursula at Be Above Leadership. If you have any questions or you want to have a one-on-one conversation about that, it's a great program.
Yes. So, well, thanks everybody. This was really wonderful. Thanks for playing. Have a great week, and hopefully we'll see you soon.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, everybody. Take care.